Going on 9 out of the 10. We're talking about markets, stocks and futures on a tear since Donald Trump took office, since he won, actually. We saw 8 days down in a row recently. What's going on here? Check. Do you think is going on in light of the president's and the party's failure to get the healthcare repeal, the Obamacare Repeal Act through?
Right. Well, that's the big one, because all of these promises, whether or not it's with healthcare or infrastructure or tax reform, predicated that the president would have a majority in the House and Senate, which he does, but to pass things. And this was, I mean, it was a demonstrable debacle, as it were. I mean, he really messed it up, and then he doubled down, like he's wont to do, by criticizing the 30 members of the Freedom Caucus.
Exactly.
And those guys he's going to need, Lindsay, the guys and gals, ladies and gentlemen.
Mostly guys, but lots of gals too.
Right. And particularly the Freedom Caucus, lots of guys. So those folks in particular will be needed for things like tax reform, infrastructure, but think about coming up at the end of this month, the debt ceiling increase coming up on the 29th. Now those guys, the far right guys in the Freedom Caucus, they don't want to raise no debt ceiling. And so the president's going to have to rely on other people like Democrats to get it done. And who knows, Democrats aren't really in a hospitable mood right now.
The GOP and the Freedom Caucus do not like him going left to get the job done. That's the last thing they want to do right now. And you see it time and time again. They're just ripping him on it. Now, he said he's going to decrease taxes, reduce regulations, create jobs. And of course, as you said, this stimulates a lot of things, manufacturing, et cetera. But are they actually fostering encouragement in job growth or the U.S. economy? I mean, we've talked about a bubble. What is this doing for people who are actually running these companies, going to these meetings at the White House and saying, all right, we're going to get U.S. Steel, we're going to do this, we're going to do that? It seems like a pipe dream for a lot of them at this point. How patient can they be?
Well, I think they're not going to be that patient, and I think that this is the reassessment time, whether or not the rhetoric matches the reality, and they couldn't do it on health care. Now what he says he wants to do, the president, is tax reform. As you know, I've said, let's do tax reform and infrastructure together.
But bundling them, too.
Bundling them is the way to go, I think. And so far, the indications from the administration are they're just going to do tax reform. And I mean, for our country, I hope he gets it done and figure out a way to get a winning coalition. But just doing tax reform by itself, I mean, the reason it hasn't been done, Lindsay, since 1986 isn't because people haven't wanted to do it. It's because it's really, like the president discovered with health care, it's really complex. So you're going to need to bring these folks together.
Who knew?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Complex. Do you think there's an asset bubble going on right now? A lot of people are wondering that.
Well, I think there's been a lot of speculation, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, the beholder. We'll have to see what happens with the president's policies, along with the fiscal policy, and that is the budget. We talked about debt ceiling, and also what happens with monetary policy, and that's, of course, the Fed. We've seen them increase interest rates one time, 2 more at least coming this year, so we'll have to see.
So she says.
Yep.
So says the good lady at the Fed. Let's talk about the jobs reports. We've got one coming out first Friday of the month, January, February, pretty positive. Not as big as last summer. No. What are we expecting? God only knows. What are you expecting?
I think it'll probably be around 200,000 jobs. We had 235,000 jobs that were created in February, and we have a 4.7% unemployment rate, which by and large is pretty good. But we've been below 5% since August of 2015. So just like the GDP numbers, we're sort of stagnated a little bit. We hope for something more positive, but it's really tough. I mean, what we saw shrink, the reason that things haven't been so great is there's a lot of people that are struggling out there, and some of them are in this group of what they call discouraged workers. That there's 522,000 of those folks, Lindsay, and they've just given up on looking for work.
Do you relieve Trump's talk about the economy jumping 4?
No. I don't think anybody thinks that we're going to.
Well, of course he does. We know.
Well, he said it initially. Absolutely.
Gosh. Well, we're going to bring you on again to talk about this jobs report and Xi Jinping, the White House. I'm sorry, at Trump's resort in Florida. We're going to bring you on to talk about how this is going to affect Asian markets and markets around the world. Thank you very much for joining me on this. Former U.S. Trading Commissioner Bart Chilton, thanks for joining us. Canada is not as open to immigrants as its government would like you to think. Its so-called open arms facade is not in line with active policies, and some are saying that the country's prime minister needs to tone it down with all his all-are-welcome rhetoric. RT's Alex Mihailovich joins us in Toronto. I got hardcore on the giant piece of limestone
big rock
jutting out into the sea. What did the draft proposal actually say?
So this proposal would say that Gibraltar's fate is in the hands of Spain and not the UK in whatever the official Brexit deal is. And obviously we know this is a British territory. It is not a Spanish territory. So it's a very obvious jab at the UK from the EU. It's also, what makes it funnier is that an overwhelming majority of residents that live in Gibraltar really support staying in the UK. They had a referendum on this a little over a decade ago.
Not staying in the EU, staying with Brexit.
Staying within the United Kingdom. Excuse me.
Gotcha.
They don't care about going back into the EU.
Right,
They're happy in the UK. About 10 years ago, they voted in a separate referendum, and 99% of them said yes. We want to stay under British rule. We don't care about creating this new joint rule under Spain as well. We're just happy the way we are. So it's clearly just a very thought-out tactic on the EU and this never-ending Brexit divorce drama.
What's the economic significance? I mean, aside from literary infamy and things like that. I mean,
well, there are a lot of different aspects to really consider here. First of all, they have a pretty decently sized population, but almost half of the people that live there, or excuse me, that work there, are coming from other outside communities. So they're traveling over the border every day to come work there, and they're coming from communities that don't have very high employment rates. So it would have not only an economic impact in Gibraltar, but also the outside Spanish communities. It would also impact imports, of course. And as we know, whenever there's any sort of diplomatic tensions between two countries or regions, it can lead to sanctions, it can lead to a cut in business ties. So this would just add another big economic risk in the UK leaving the EU. And
who do you think's going to win?
Never ending. I don't know. Well, I'll report back when I find out more.
All right. Thank you so much, Bianca Ficini. There's an infection, you're done.
Exactly. So there's a whole host of criteria that really people should consider. And again, the month of April is a month dedicated to raising awareness about that. So
you wouldn't think we're pro-organ donation, are we?
I'm not going to say I am.
Totally. Sorry. There we go. There's our
bias.
Thank you very much, RT correspondent Manuel Raffalo.
Thanks, Lindsay.